the first thing I guess you may notice is that in the brochure it says Cliff Wilson. And I assure you I don't look at all like Cliff Wilson, who's a lot taller and slimmer than I am. Unfortunately, Cliff can't be here today through illness, so he's asked me to step in. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my background first. I actually, interestingly enough, when they showed the threepenny bit, I suddenly realised that I actually joined a bank and started working for a bank just after the threepenny bit was actually thrown away and we moved to decimalisation. So that's when I started in a bank. And I actually worked through, if you like, everything from doing what in America I suppose they would call the teller, through sweeping the safe, etc., through safe custody, all those sort of jobs and management roles. But about 20 years ago, I got actually into electronic cash management for corporate customers. And when I got into that, and it was very much in the infancy, I started to understand where security became that enabler. Because if you wanted to have access to your balances, you needed to do that securely. You needed to be able to identify yourself, authenticate yourself before you did so. If you wanted to make a payment, then you needed to actually sign that payment in some way electronically. And in fact, because I was doing the corporate banking side and the payments may be sort of $500,000, $1 million, 2 million, 10 million, whatever, then you needed multiple signatures. So I found that quite fascinating, and obviously that brought me into the first sort of look at cryptography, how you use smart cards, which were at the time in their infancy, and I can assure you that you wouldn't be carrying around the smart card reader in your briefcase that we used to use because it would be bigger than your briefcase. So the technology has moved a lot. And I think as I moved through that, I then actually got interested in delivering services at that time across an extranet, because nobody dared use the internet because it was still pretty much in its, something for the technical folks. But we did an extranet service, and I started to get involved in how we could use public key infrastructures. The business opportunities that the use of public keys and private keys and a public key infrastructure gave you. The way in which, and also one of the things I started to look at was, why can't you single sign on to multiple services? Why do I have to keep coming on and off and doing things? So I got very interested in that area. So I actually moved to IBM to work in security from a business and consulting point of view about 12 years ago. And I got very interested in, and worked on a number of programs. Things like I worked for one of the government institutions to actually put in place a public key infrastructure, multi-factor authentication, digital signing as a service for the applications that they wanted to offer to their partners, professional partners, as well as to citizens. So a number of projects like that. And my current role, though, is much more as a business manager, because I now run the professional services and managed services teams for the UK. So, but I still always come back to that thing that I think it's, security to me is from birth all the way through is an enabler of what you want to do as a business. And I think the biggest problem we all have is actually coming back to it later and trying to re-engineer it into what we've already done. The other thing I thought about was the sort of title here was the future of cybersecurity, which led me to think about the past. And I think as we go through a lot of the slides, you will see people talking about BYOD, mobility, the actual explosion of devices, etc. And to me, when I look backwards, what I see is there's a huge amount of similarity between security 50 years ago and where we are now. There are still bad people. Those bad people are still trying to get into our offices or our systems to steal things. Those bad people still have, by the way, much better incentive programs than we have, because We can't go to our staff and say, if you don't do this properly, I will break your legs or steal your children. So their incentive programs have always been much better than ours have. The key difference to me, though, is the aggregation of data and the fact that we've transferred money into data. And data is far much easier to carry around and move around. When I was first in a bank, I used to open a safe which had £3 million in it. And I can assure you, if you see these programs where they're running down the street with a briefcase with £3 million in it, they would have had to be incredibly strong and probably got the briefcase from the TARDIS. So now you can fit as much money as you like almost onto a USB stick, as much data as you like onto a USB stick. So the portability of what we're protecting has actually changed hugely. So I think that's, to me, was the biggest change. And that future is actually in there because all of this now is about data. And a lot of it is about how we look at the data, how we mine that data, how in real time we actually make decisions based on that data. And the volume of data that we will be looking at going forward is huge now. But if you think it's huge now, it's going to be frighteningly huge in the future. We are already, I think, earlier on, Peter Jopling talked a bit about how we mine that data, how we reduce events down to actions that you actually need to take part with, to do something with. We're already doing proofs of concept in how we actually use big data. What is big data? Well, it's just bigger than the last blob of data, I suppose. But it's really about extending the boundaries of the type of data, the data that you use to bring into that decision making as to whether this really is an attack, whether it really is an advanced persistent threat and an attack that's going underway. So you can broaden that data out, improve the technology you use to mine that data and to make decisions based on that data. And then you can improve the speed by which you can come to the decisions that you need to come to actually stop the bad guys doing things. And I think as well, I can remember there was an attack on a bank where basically there was somebody around the front trying to steal the night safe. Now you may think that's very funny because actually a night safe was a big hole in the wall with a chute down the back, so you couldn't actually get your arm down and get the money out. But whilst they were doing that and everybody was concentrating on that, the real bad guys were down the road breaking into another bank and doing the proper job of stealing the money. Yeah? And that's where I see sort of things like DDoS attacks. So with a DDoS attack, yes, it may be to try and bring down a nation state or a bank or something because you want to do that for a terrorist attack or whatever, or to actually advertise the latest thing that you want to bring to the world's attention. But in a lot of cases, when the bad guys are doing those attacks, that's so that they can go round to the back, open a window and crawl in and steal all your data, whilst you're concentrating on what's going on at the front of house. So I think, to me, the future is in the fact that that is constantly going to extend, and that volume of data and that aggregation of data will extend. I could almost stop now, couldn't I think? I did actually look up the word seminar as well before I started this, just out of interest, because a seminar, as I understand it, means that you've already read a load of documentation and are coming along to actually talk about it and think about it and learn a bit more about it. So as we go through, what I will try and do is stop occasionally and we can see if we can have some debate or questions or whatever, because the other thing which was in there was it's about debate and the ability for people to exchange ideas. So, I hope I won't be too boring. I have got 30 slides, but I will try and get through those quite quickly to give everybody a bit of a chance to talk as well. So, hopefully, this is infrared. Great. So, we've really sort of talked about this. I think virtually all of the presentations that you've seen already have really talked about the fact that there are a lot of challenging issues around. Those issues face all types of organizations, all sizes of organizations, and the fact is that as we move forward, I think one of the things that we're recognizing is that in the old days you could say a business model would change. Let's change a business model. And that business model would take you 6 months to define, a year to implement, and you'd train everybody and everything would happen, and you'd build it and you'd deploy it, etc. But now, with cloud, with mobile, with the production of apps, with the changes in which you can actually build applications, and if you've got a, say, a service-oriented architecture where you can plug different bits of process together to create a new product or a new business model, then that means that you're deploying these things and bringing them to market much, much faster. And speed to market is something that, I guess, for us security people, can be a problem because it doesn't give us time necessarily to actually build the policies, the processes, the security controls into that business model, into the people, and get them trained to actually take it up and do it. So one of the things that IBM, because my global boss, I guess, was formerly with some of the American agencies and was then CISO for IBM. And one of the things I found quite interesting was her view was actually, as security people, one of the things which we try to do is to look at the new business models that are appearing and actually preempt the discussions. So when the use of social media, the use of Twitter, Lockbox, all these other things came along, or was starting to appear in the general marketplace, and corporate companies were beginning to look at how do we use this, how do we make this work for us, it was Chris Lovejoy, our general manager, who went to IBM and said, this technology is great. IBM should be using it. IBM should be helping its customers to use it. IBM should be encouraging its staff to use it. And we would like to work with you to enable you to do that. But as we're going through that process, we want to be wholly included so that as we start to roll it out, and we started to roll it out, there was already a training program. So I can go onto the intranet and I can call up a training program and I work through that and it tells me where are the pitfalls, don't put, corporate or customer information onto Dropbox, simple things like that, Don't use this for that, but you can use it for this. This is how to use it. This is how you want to think about your persona in terms of your personal persona, your corporate persona. So all of those things were already being embedded into the thinking as we started to roll that out. So I think, again, that comes back to this thing about enabling the business to do what it needs to do to make money, to move forward, to improve the world, to run the country, whatever. That's interesting. Ah, there it goes. So, again, the figures are just meaningless, to be honest, about the expansion of technology, about the expansion of the number of devices. I think Andrew was talking about cryptography earlier on. And to me, actually, cryptography, by the way, is everywhere. As soon as you connect to a website that says HTTPS on the front of it, you're using cryptography. Cryptography as well is not just about actually securing stuff. You've actually got to think about it in a resilience point of view as well. Because if your website certificate goes out of date, or another certificate goes out of date, or your signing certificate goes out of date, or you change your name, or whatever, you can immediately create resilience problems. And by the way, if you lose your keys, of course, you could lose your data. It gets very difficult to decrypt it if you've lost all your keys. So, yeah, it's a lot to think about. And as these number of devices and this type of work is going on, because selling, on e-commerce, payments are all about cryptography. They're all there. That's all there in the background. And the volume of cryptographic stuff that's going on is huge. I think many of you will have seen this anyway. Yeah. This is, if you like, one of the standard slides that just about everybody puts up. But it's that level of sophistication that I think is fascinating. Because we've got to remember that the bad guys out there, be them nation states, be them organized crime, whatever, they have huge facilities, they have huge investment, and they have some of the best people, if not the best people in the world, working on the problem of how to steal things or how to bring stuff down. So, to me, it's not just that sophistication that's evolving, it's the fact that, constantly those people, to be honest, just see it as a business or a service or a government institution or whatever. And they are going to do it in the best way that they can, and they have the investment. And as I said before, in some cases, they've got the ways in which they can persuade people to do things in their pocket. If you look at one of the recent attacks where an organised crime gang used an APT to get into a bank that was issuing prepaid cards. They planted something, learned about it, came back a bit later on, changed the application, came back a bit later on, created a load of cards with no limit on them. And then they organised so that in a single day or a single night, hundreds of people in different countries went to ATMs and drew money out and walk away with, I think was it 9 million or something dollars? To me, that's not just sophistication, that's huge project management, organisation. I wish I had people like that who could really organise projects and get people motivated and get them to do things all at the same time, all in exactly the same way, in the right way. These guys are really good. And I think the other thing we forget as well is that we talk a lot about reported attacks. All of these slides, and some I'll show you in a minute, talk about reported attacks. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Many, many companies do not report their attacks, so you don't see it in the news. Some of you may be talking to people who may know about them or may have a better view of those. But then there's all that stuff which actually is undetected. Because if you look at those companies with perhaps who've got a managed SIEM or a true up-to-date set of IDS, IPS systems, and are actually mining that data, looking at that data, analysing it, etc. If you look at the volume of attacks and the volume of events that they're seeing and then compare it to people who don't have that, then that's a huge discrepancy. But all of this boils down to the fact that actually companies have woken up, and that to me is a good thing. In the past, as security people, we weren't always listened to. We may be shouting in a vacuum. But the impact, I think, 10 years ago, it really became something where reputation started to be on the line if you had a security attack or a successful security attack, or you lost something, you lost private data. When the HMRC lost a CD with a load of stuff on it, it was big news. And the fact is now that that news can move so fast, in the blink of an eye, if you all think my presentation is terrible, which I hope you don't, then you can go onto Twitter and tell a few million people within a couple of hours. It's there, and it's dead. So that reputational risk change, and also the cost of attacks and successful attacks and cybercrime, has meant that all of these people are now on the board are actually interested. Some of you may be thinking, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yep, because obviously you've got to report more, you've got to keep them involved, you've got to keep them up to date. But to me it's a great thing, because that means that the understanding is there that we need to get into this first when we're doing business change, and also when we're looking at budgets, we're starting to get an understanding of the risks and the value of those risks and the value that we need to apply in terms of mitigating those risks. So you've seen some of this already, so I'm not going to repeat it. There's lots and lots of bubbles there, but our XForce people really, I think the great thing about XForce is they're looking at everything that crosses the IBM network. And we have, I think it's 3,700 outsourced companies who we look after, 400,000 staff. We're in 125 countries. So there's an awful lot of stuff going through there, and that enables us to see what sort of attacks are being raised before the application owners like Microsoft see them, etc. So we're seeing them very, very quickly, and we're reporting through on that. We've also, I don't think Peter mentioned, we've also recently formed a partnership with a company called CrowdStrike in the US, because actually a lot of what this is doing is actually telling you what has happened, what are the vulnerabilities, but they're not necessarily telling you who is doing it and why they're doing it, which is also fascinating in terms of planning forward. So that's something where we've got in, as I say, we're working with CrowdStrike to actually do that. And there's other companies in the UK who do similar things. Oops. And there's one with even more bubbles now. I think it's really a fact of the fact that this isn't going away. It's increasing. The speed of increase is consistently going up. We're not going to see that frequency and that change happen anymore. Yeah. So the future, I don't see the future saying this is slowing down. I don't see anybody in this room being out of a job shortly, shall I say, which is the good news. The bad news is there's just going to be more and more and more of it. So there are copies of that report on our desk outside, but it is something which is quite an interesting read. And again, those are some of the numbers of what we're doing. The interesting thing that comes out of this, though, is that actually we've talked a lot about the sophistication of the bad guys, and the interesting thing is how are they actually getting in? How are they actually being able to make those attacks, press home those attacks, steal stuff? And actually, a lot of it is about the basics. A huge amount of it is about the basics. These attacks really are about going in, finding the systems that you haven't patched, finding the systems that are on end-of-life application or operating systems, finding the places where your processes are not good enough, where your people are not trained, and actually exploiting those things. So one of the fundamental things to me about now, the past, the future, whichever you like, is getting the basics right has got to be fundamental to your strategy to actually mitigating risk. And that isn't about the security people per se, because they are testing, auditing, checking, seeing whether or not you've patched stuff, etc. But it's about the general run-of-the-mill technology people, the people who are supporting those systems. And it's also about everybody down to the cleaner or whomever in your business who actually has some form of access or some form of knowledge to your environment or your systems. And that, and when we start to add to that control systems, SCADA, and all those sorts of areas, then that's basically everybody in your company, even on the production floor. There are people on the production floor who are operating machinery which may be connected by the internet to the robots or the pump valves or whatever. So, security isn't just about the technology, it isn't just about the white-collar worker, it isn't just about the people who control the money or the data, it's everybody. And I think this is underlined by some very clever people who said, well, let's scan the internet and let's see what this really looks like. And as you would expect, a couple of interesting things came out. One is the internet is huge. The internet has got a huge number of endpoints, huge number of IP addresses, but more than half of those IP addresses aren't actually used. But they're probably connected to something. A huge number of those IP addresses are not protected, but they're probably connected to something. So, this problem is huge and it's pervasive. So again, for us, I think the future is about how do we lock not just our systems down, but if you're working in a government level or a CNI level or whatever, then it's how do we lock down everybody else's? How do we get everybody else to actually follow these sorts of principles as well and improve their security? Because otherwise they can be a way in to your environment or to your business or your business model or your critical national infrastructure. So, it isn't just about ourselves and our own systems, it's about how do we improve the overall posture. Why hasn't that come up? That picture should have come up. I don't click it again, just in case. And I think mobile devices, there's already been a talk on BYOD, mobile security, etc. So I don't intend to go into it a huge amount. But to me, it's not just about the technology. It's about training the people. The people who have that technology in their pocket. I have in my pocket an iPhone that can take my corporate mail on it. I can also access a small number of other corporate applications. But for that, I sacrifice the fact that if I lose it, I must tell my business, and my business will then instigate a process which will involve wiping my iPhone. And I know that, so I back up what I want to back up, I can assure you. But I've accepted that, and that's fair enough. It also means I have to put in a password every time I want to do something with it, which is an irritant. So one of the things, again, though, is that is actually how do we separate the personal from the corporate? How do we create an environment where actually I can just switch it on and see my personal stuff, because actually, I probably shouldn't say that, but in a personal capacity, a lot of the stuff that I have nobody's really bothered about, and I'm not really bothered if anybody looks at it. But from a corporate point of view, if I've got a separate area that I can go to, then that would be great. And that's where I then log on and actually do stuff. but there is a huge amount of... Oops. Sorry, I did two then. Doesn't like my pictures, does it? It's probably fine for you guys. And again, this is the same. We've heard this now, probably you've heard this now 3 or 4 times. It is not just an IT challenge. It's about the people and managing the people. One of the things I signed up to when I put this stuff on my iPhone is I won't allow my wife to use my iPhone. It says that in my corporate instructions. Or my children. Because if I do, how do I know that they haven't left it on? They haven't moved the data somewhere else. Yeah? So I had to sign up to that. It's fascinating, really. And the other thing to think about is how much have I outsourced? People talking about a lot at the moment about putting things on the cloud, outsourcing your processing, becoming, we used to call it virtual organizations when 20 years ago we were calling things virtual organizations. But who actually owns security? Who actually runs security? Who can impact, of those people who are in your company, can run that? What risks can they control and mitigate? How much have we, whenever we're looking at what we're outsourcing, is that bringing in a benefit through a lower cost? Is that bringing in a benefit because there are skilled people I can call on 24/7 who I don't want to have to pay for in my business? And that's great. And those are very, very good reasons for doing it. And I'm standing here because I sell managed security services, so I'm going to say that. But equally, as a company, who actually within the company now understands the risks, has managed those risks, and understands the governance that they have in place and the ownership of risk that they have in place and how they are managing that. So to me, that's fundamental as well when you're looking at where do I place my bets, in a way. And that's the same with cloud. It's the same with any form of outsourcing. I may be, if you like, delegating work to those companies and those providers, but I can't actually give them the risk. I can put risk on them in some sort of financial manner or whatever, but I still haven't actually given them the risk. I still own that risk. So I need to make sure that that risk is properly mitigated. And I have the governance in place to manage that. God, these slides are great, aren't they? This one is actually a nice picture about virtualization and cloud and the threats and opportunities. So I think, try this button again. No, it doesn't like that. So actually, when I look at it, that's a perfect picture of a cloud. Because actually, when I must admit, by the way, I was talking to somebody earlier that the word cloud to me means something which is fluffy and filled with water droplets, or is extremely foggy, yeah? And actually, that makes me think about when I'm putting work into the cloud or delivering services through the cloud or whatever, what can I actually see and understand? What do I know? What do I actually understand about the risks and the way in which those risks are being mitigated by that nice fluffy grey thing that I've just put all that stuff into? So there you are, I've turned that picture into something useful there. So the next few slides really talk about how we manage risk and how we manage risk not just for our customers but for ourselves as well. I've tried to talk a bit about that as we've gone along. But I'm sort of conscious that I've got, I think, 20 minutes or so left. And what I didn't want to do, by the way, all these slides will be, as I understand it, available to you later on. So Does anybody have any thoughts or comments about what we've talked about so far? Or any questions or points they would like to debate? Or shall I just keep going? Yeah.
Small enterprises. Oh, sorry. What sort of products are IBM producing for small enterprises? Security-wise, sorry, I wasn't being very specific there.
I think I'm going to be perfectly honest. If you look at the products that we produce in terms of our software products, then many of those products are aimed at enterprise-sized companies. So, and it depends what you mean by a small company. To me, the definition of small, medium enterprise in the government space is very different from what IBM look at as a small business. So I would say that, you know, what we haven't done is concentrated our product development on the true SMEs. Yeah. However, what we are doing is changing it. What we have done is actually move some of those products down to a point where we can sell them through channels, we can sell them through partners, through managed services partners. So actually some of the things that you may be seeing in the cloud and some of the services that are offered through the cloud are still actually in the background protected or managed or use IBM's product set. And the other things which we're trying to do at the moment, and I think quite a number of companies of our size are struggling with this, and I'm quite open about the fact that we're struggling with it, is actually turning those products into SaaS type services and actually having a pricing model that is truly reflective of the usage of those products. And that's, you know, that's where I think you will see a lot of, I hope not just talk, but a lot of movement within IBM going forward, because we've actually, we've spent a lot of money on implementing cloud and offering cloud services, and I think the next piece will really to be moved much more into the SaaS environment and creating a business model and a pricing model for that environment. Sorry. Yeah? Whichever is nearest. How can I make a choice?
I'm just passing a comment. A couple of slides back, you mentioned factors that results in breaches, like weak passwords and stuff like that. But I just want to add that ignorant sysadmins are also part of the picture. It should be added, because sometimes they believe Microsoft is the god, so they accept hook, line, and sinker what Microsoft says. But we know the malware authors, they are very, very skilled people. And sometimes the security engineer could see a vulnerability or a weakness in technology, but the sysadmin don't see it. So sometimes their ignorance could be a big problem for the enterprise.
I think that's absolutely right. I think this is where I guess there's a dependence upon the true people who know about the technology and know about the applications and know about how they work, working with the people who set the policies and the processes and the training to actually ensure that you can bridge that ignorance gap. Because you're right, in a lot of cases, and to be honest, I sit there and do it every day. I trust the fact that IBM has given me this set of services with this set of policies and controls, that I now believe make this safe to use so long as I follow those policies, processes, and standards. So that's why those things are so important, and why it's so important, you're right, that actually it's the people who actually understand the difference between a sysadmin's knowledge of security and a security hacker or penetration tester's understanding of that technology, how you actually bridge that gap to make sure that your processes, your systems actually protect you. Sorry, does that answer? Yep.
Peter Trimber, University of London. Just a very quick question about the role of the risk manager. How does the role of the risk manager within the organisation translate in accordance with your risk communication strategy and the role of risk managers in your partner organizations, your end user organizations, because I do think sometimes there is a miscommunication or disjoint process in place, because anything to do with cyber is in real time. And I'm just wondering how this whole process links, because there is an organizational cultural aspect as well. And sometimes I see that organizations are very sort of self-focused and not really as embracing as they should with stakeholder organizations.
I think I would have to say, I can't answer that question truly. And the reason I can't answer that question is that I think it will be very different in whatever environment, business environment, governance environment that you're working in. If you look at across maybe 20 different companies or financial institutions or government institutions, you will see probably at least 10 different governance models and ownership models of risk. So I think, and you may see a risk manager, you may not see a risk manager. The risk manager may de facto be the CISO. Yep, there may be a risk manager who's looking at country risk, financial risk, and therefore there's a confusion over where does security risk fit. So I think what we actually need to say is that your governance model has to have that ability to recognize risks, report on risks, work out ways of mitigating risks, and then implementing the controls, the training, the processes, the policies, etc., that mitigate that, and that comes back around to starting all over again. So who's involved in that? But I have to say, I think, to me, if the company is large enough, then they should have a risk manager. But even that job in different companies is going to have a very different focus and a very different... It's going to be different from a retail institution to a manufacturing institution to a financial institution. So I think it's having, you're right, it's having that joined up process to go from what's happened now to what we need to do to implementing it so it doesn't happen again. Yeah? Sorry.
Just a word about people, I suppose. So with the changes in technology, in terms of infrastructure and development methodologies and everything else, it's clear that the skill sets of your security professionals need to be much more up to date. And being a few years out of date, you're tremendously relevant, frankly. Has it changed the type of people we need, or is it just a matter of updating skills and knowledge?
That's a very interesting question, because I think actually one of my jobs, I guess, is to recruit people. In fact, there's somebody sat here who's just been recruited, so I've better be careful now. But I look at people in two ways, and I think you always have to, because there are going to be people who have got very deep technical knowledge, are fascinated by that technology, are willing, because of that fascination, to actually keep way up to date with it, which is incredibly difficult in this marketplace, and have the brain size, I guess, to be able to do that. And you really, really need those people. The fascinating thing is that they are also very, very difficult sometimes to manage, understand, and get the right stuff out of, because their fascination often means their brain isn't concentrating on what you want, which is the actual requirement or business need or whatever. So I think you certainly need those people. You need those people as well who are actually fascinated and interested in process. And if you ask me, by the way, I'm not fascinated by process all the time. I'm fascinated that people get process right and put the right process in. But if you ask me to sit down and actually run a process or do RMADs or all these sort of things, then I'm afraid my brain sort of starts to wander. And I'm honest about that, so I don't do it. But basically, you need those people as well who actually want to do that and want to sit down at a desk and make that happen and manage that. But also you need people who are actually good communicators, because managing risk is all about communicating that risk upwards and training the people and educating the people downwards. In fact, it's also actually about educating and training the people upwards as well, by the way. You just don't make it appear that you're doing that. So I'm looking for good communicators as well. There are very, very few people I have seen where you could take all three of those and say that they've got them. There are some, but there are very, very few. So I think you have to have a mix of people. You have to understand the things that you want to do and build an organisation and a team that actually achieves that. And in this country, not necessarily in all countries, but in this country, that's actually very difficult, because I'm sure you're all aware there is quite a shortage of people with those skills, and they aren't cheap in the marketplace because of that. You know, and retaining them is quite interesting, because if you've got three different types of people, retaining different people is interesting as well. So I think it is. Sorry, is that a long-winded way of answering the question? Or?
You've got to have the mix of the team, right?
You've got to have the mix of the team, because I don't ever believe you will find all of those things in one person. And if you do find them in one person, then there'll be a queue of people trying to buy them, by the way. Sorry, can you speak up a bit? I'm not sure.
I'll wait for
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. So I've just joined Rodger's team a few weeks, but I'm recruiting for people now on a sort of regular basis, people to replace me, and yes, that I look for people that have got CISSP and firewall engineers or IDS engineers, security aware, technical people. I look for individuals that are processed, people that understand the processes that was mentioned, but more and more I look for people that are business aware, that understand information security is a business function. It's no longer an IT security function, and people that are, they don't have to be commercial, they don't have to understand the marketing aspects, but they need to understand the impact on their business or any managed services that they're supporting. But it is hard, and I've interviewed probably 23 people in the last 4 weeks. I'm still looking. Okay.
Okay. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm just going to move. So I've got lots and lots of slides here. Yeah. I love this thing. Is it going to work? Yes. So the summary of what we've been talking about, I think, is that security, the challenges are not just complex, but they cross all of the dimensions of your business. And that's really an important thing to always remember and to work through. And I shouldn't have put all these builds in. As we move forward and we think about security, what you will see is there's more and more data, more and more information. We need to collect and analyze everything, but therefore we need the tools that actually make that possible, because you don't have enough people to be able to analyze everything, unless you're in China where you're managing sort of internet access and you've got a few thousands of people doing the job. But in essence, you need to be looking at the technology to analyze, because putting in IDS, putting in IPS, putting in DLP, putting in log management, putting in systems that gather data, etc., is great. But if you look at the volume of data that comes out of all of those devices, it's meaningless. So you need something, you need a way of actually boiling that down to the things that you really need to look at. And again, that comes back to that data explosion. And as I say, I think for the future, that data explosion will just continue to grow.
Got a question. Looking forward on data, we can do a number of things to protect going forward in terms of data. But what about legacy, particularly with the change of classifications for security?
Legacy is always a fascinating area, isn't it? Yeah. And for me, the question, and I think one of the ways in which banks are looking at this, that I know of anyway, and there may be some bankers in here who will disagree with me, but a lot of legacy now is looking at, well, okay, can we move that legacy to somewhere where it's going to be more manageable, we can make it more secure, etc.? Or do we just actually put more layers of concrete around it, and manage the access to it better and manage the data in transit better, etc., to actually improve our security posture? So there's always going to be a balance somewhere between what you can do, what you can afford to do, and what risk you're willing to take, and the mitigations that you can do. And if you look at, I was talking to a guy about some of the nuclear sites, and actually the number of pumps and valves and all that stuff you've got in there is huge, and putting in protection individually, is impossible. So what you do is that you build bigger fences, you get more guards and more dogs and more, if you like, disaster recovery or emergency response processes in place, so that if something did happen, you can run in and solve it very quickly. So that's...
To me, that works if you can ring fence the legacy.
Absolutely. But if
you need reach back into the legacy, then you've got potential travel from one domain to the other.
And that is where there are some, I think, you would probably need to talk to one of my architects, because one of his, if you like, huge things that he was doing in architecting a solution for one of the government people was to actually look at how you get that separation between environments but still allow the business to happen. And there are ways in which you can do that. And I think that really comes down to very clever architecture and very clever understanding of the systems at either end and what can and can't be done. But that to me is very much an architectural question. I'm not qualified to answer, if I'm honest, but I can introduce you to somebody who could. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to flick through, I hope. We've already talked a lot about research and the XForce, a lot about situational awareness. As I mentioned before, I think one of the interesting things is, we're moving not just now into SIEM, but we're moving into greater understanding of who is attacking us, why they're attacking us, because in fact, what we're actually doing is then reacting to the business models of those attackers. Why are they doing it? Where are they doing it from? How are they doing it, etc. And so we're looking at their business models and then reacting better. And actually, that also drives the ability to understand how those attacks are being orchestrated, which drives us to actually build better systems back into our SIEM to understand how we recognize that or how we recognize the start of an attack. So I think that to me is the future. There's something about behavior that is coming up, and some of the newer products I'm seeing coming onto the market are taking a much more behavioral view of what is going on. So rather than looking at it from a bits and bytes and technology perspective, treating an attack as almost a person with a behavioral profile that you can then track, understand, learn about, and reuse and come back to again. But it always comes back to the fact that, as I mentioned before, the volume of data that we don't look at is still huge. If you look at your organizations in terms of what you look at for security monitoring, is probably the tip of the iceberg. And there's a huge amount of other stuff, some of which is structured, some of which is unstructured. And again, this is where the technology is moving into how can we actually understand the unstructured as well as the structured? How do we play that into our behavioral understanding? How do we move that forward? So all of this, yes, I think the future is about prediction. What was the name of that computer in Blake 7? All right, you're old enough. Sorry, somebody's asked. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah. So that computer used to sit there in the corner and say, by the way, if you turn right here, you'll be killed. If you turn left, you won't. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So by predicting the whole of the universe's activities, I think. But in essence, that's always what we're trying to do. We're trying to move away from reactive to predictive. And the greater the knowledge we can get from the data that we have and an understanding of that data, the more we can predict. And if you look at what IBM, if you ever have chance, then there is stuff on the net about IBM Watson and what that's doing. And you'll see how that's being used in some of the medical stuff, in business models, in consumer marketing models, etc. But we're also looking at that as to how that can be used in this space as well. So we want to move from being reactive to actually optimizing the amount of information we get, drilling it down to a point where we can become truly understanding of that data and truly actually be able to act on that data in a professional way. That's, easy to say, very easy to say, isn't it? I've just done it, but it isn't at all easy, I think, to truly deliver that. And I think I'm going to stop on this slide for a minute, because again, I come back to that theme of it's not just about the technology, but one of the things that our CISO did was to develop sort of 10 fundamental, essential things that you need to think about in terms of security. And if you read through those, some of them talk about technology, some of them talk about people, some of them talk about process, some of them talk about all of them. But these are the things which she was looking at and saying, if I was to rattle off 10 things that I think we need to do as a corporate to make ourselves more secure, what would they be? And by the way, she's a lot better at this than I am, because she can actually not just recite them, she can actually recite a spiel about each one of them that's the same every time afterwards. So remember when I said there's some people who can communicate, have a brilliant brain, etc. She's one of those. But I think we can pick any one of those. Manage third-party security compliance. Actually, that's one which has really only become to the fore in the last few years, I think. The FSA, I think many of the people who understood it were doing it. But if you look at, many of the people who should have been doing it, they weren't. And the regulators have woken up to this much more. And they've started to put in, and saying you should have these controls, you should be doing this. And by the way, as a supplier, it's great, because it means that every time somebody asks me for something, they send me a big long questionnaire, to fill in and say, are you secure? Tick, 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 tick. But that is but it's not just about doing that once. It's about actually watching those businesses that you're doing business with. It's a bit like, I think what I remember when I was in banking was you were constantly monitoring and auditing and watching the financial health of the companies that you were lending money to or doing business with. And many businesses do that in their credit departments. They consistently go out and do credit reviews. They're watching the companies. They're looking at their annual accounts, etc. As security people, are we doing the same? And not just doing perhaps pen testing, but actually looking at them as a business and seeing as a business whether they're still viable. As a business, where is their business model going? So those people that we do business with, I mean, you might choose Google or Amazon, for instance. If you look at how their terms and conditions have changed over the last few years, when you originally signed up, it was completely different because their business model wasn't necessarily driven by actually selling your data, or using your data to sell you more or whatever. Now their business model has moved tremendously, so their underlying terms and conditions have moved tremendously. So, what risk does that make to you or your business? So I think each one of those has its own little piece. Security-rich services by design, and I come back to that, enabling the business, starting at the beginning, and that's before somebody starts to define an application, by the way. I don't believe that security starts, and it does in a lot of companies at the moment. The business defines what they want to do, they come up with a business model, they define it all in a nice room, they go to IT say, right, what's your requirement? So the business goes away and says, well, it's these 3 things, and IT says, no, that's not good enough. I need 10,000 requirements, please. So they go away and write 10,000 requirements and come back. And then somebody says, right, let's get a security architect in to have a look at this and see how it operates. So I think they should be sat in the room with the guys defining the business models. They should be sat in the room understanding the overall business strategy of the company and aligning the security and the risk posture to that business strategy. Not to the security strategy, but to the business strategy of that corporate customer or that government or whatever.